Okay, so hello and welcome back. So today we're going to be finishing off the series of LA to Chicago transcontinental routes, and we'll be finishing with the Golden State route, which was the Southern Pacific and Rock Island route between LA and Chicago. This route was one of the least fancy of the routes between Southern California and Chicago, at least compared to the Chiefs and the city of Los Angeles. This route was generally regarded as the least scenic of the routes between LA and Chicago. The Union Pacific did pass by the Rockies, and the Santa Fe went through Raton Pass, which I hear is very amazing, and from what little I've seen of it, it actually is. And the Southern Pacific, only really big claim to fame on this route was that it was the lowest crossing of the Continental Divide. Anyways, the Golden State most interesting history happened in New Mexico and Arizona. The construction of the line in the southwest started with the El Paso Northeastern Railway. Well, technically it was like the New Mexico and Coal Company Railway. Anyways, it became the El Paso Northeastern. So again, I'm going to be kind of glossing over some of the history here because it's some of the stuff gets really complicated, and I'm not here for that. I'm here for the train and just the general overview. So anyways, this company started off with a very fraught history. The line was eventually sued by the Texas and Pacific Railway over unpaid bills, and it was eventually bought out by that company. And then the El Paso Northeastern was formed to finish the job with what was left of the railway, or at least the parts of the Texas and Pacific didn't build out. At this time, the railway became more successful and it expanded itself through various subsidiaries across New Mexico and parts of southern Arizona. One of these subsidiaries was the El Paso and Rock Island Railway, which connected to the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific at what is now Tucumcari. Originally, they were going to connect at Santa Rosa, but they ended up having to go further north over a land grant dispute. So that's why the connections at Tucumcari instead of Santa Rosa, it's just a little fluke of legal history and legalities. They also had a connection with the Santa Fe at French, New Mexico, as well as other lines throughout southern Arizona and northern New Mexico, and all this happened between like 1880 and 1905. In 1905, the New Mexico Railway and Coal Company, which was the holding company that owned the El Paso Northeastern and various other railroads, went into talks with the company that owned the El Paso and Southwestern and its various mining interests, which was owned by James Douglas and Phelps Dodge. Or Phelps Dodge might have been a investor company. I'm not entirely sure. I think it was a person. I couldn't tell which. It might have been one of those things or it was both, an institution and a person, depending on what time of history we're talking. And this line ran in Arizona from Benson to El Paso and connected with the SP. By 1912, the railway ran all the way to Tucson, and the railway did well until about 1917, when striking workers and their families and various bystanders are all deported to Mexico. Some of these people weren't even Mexican citizens. A lot of them were actually American citizens because, one way to get rid of your striking workers, even if they're whether or not they're American, is, oh yeah, some of them are Mexicans. Let's just send them all back. Screw them. That was a thing back then. This was also followed in 1918 by the collapse of copper prices following the end of the First World War. So in 1924, the El Paso and Southwestern leased the entirety of its railway to the Southern Pacific, and on November of 1937, the SP bought out the remaining shares and debt of the business and just fully incorporated into the SP, and it became fully the SP in 1954. Also on the map that I'll hopefully be having in, the El Paso and Southwestern is actually the southern lines below the red lines in red line in Arizona and New Mexico, as well as some of the connections north of it, but mostly it's the southern blue lines below the red line. That was the El Paso and Southwestern. The Sunset route was actually built by the SP on its own and was built beforehand. So the first passenger trains ran this route in 1902 when the train was handled by 3 different railways, the Rock Island as far as Tucumcari, and then the El Paso Northeastern handled the train from Tucumcari to El Paso, and then the Southern Pacific handled it the rest of the way into Los Angeles along the Sunset route. And the Sunset route, as said, was completed to El Paso in 1888, where it connected with another SP subsidiary that ran east to San Antonio. And the first runs of the Golden State Limited were a seasonal train that was an all-Pullman affair that ran in the winter and spring. The main train was the California Limited westbound and the Chicago and St. Louis Limited eastbound, which carried coaches and tourist sleepers, and this train ran when the Golden State Limited wasn't running. Other than running over the Continental Divide at its lowest altitude, the other claim to fame this route can kind of have is that it was the second longest passenger route in North America, and it also handled connections with the National Railway of Mexico. I think it was at Nogales or somewhere in or Tucson maybe. It handled a few, and some of its through trains, which I think was the Imperial, also went into San Diego through Mexico. The Golden State Limited started running in 1910 as a year-round train and did so until it was canceled in 1968. The train ran on a 63-hour schedule in 1926 to compete with the Santa Fe's California Limited, which continued to do significantly more business. They actually both ran as a $10 extra fare train, which was basically a first-class charge. And originally it ran on a 68-hour schedule, and the Golden State wouldn't become a streamlined train until 1948, when the SP and Rock Island decided it should run on the 40-hour standard schedule between Chicago and Los Angeles. The Rock Island wanted to make this train a proper streamliner that would compete directly with the Super Chief, and they would have called it the Golden Rocket, and each company would furnish one full streamlined set. I think it was they were going to be built by Bud. I'm not sure on that. Just saying. I think they ended up going with mostly leftover equipment, or at least that's what the SP ended up doing. And at the last minute, the SP pulled out of this plan, and the Rock Island had already ordered its train set, and these cars were put into an equipment pool along with other cars from Pullman and Bud. And now we're going to get kind of into like a little bit of the history of the Rock Island, at least towards the end of its existence. The reasons given by some as to why the SP pulled out of this is that they didn't really care about the road because it was seen as secondary even by them, and it was very much a tertiary route between Chicago and Los Angeles. And the Rock Island from Tucumcari to Kansas City was poorly maintained, and for a while, like as far as I can tell, wasn't signaled, or at least chunks of it weren't. And this remained a problem for the Rock Island up until its demise in 1980. And the Rock Island, although having periods of good management, wasn't always the best run or best advised railway in the world. It was built mostly to carry produce from Midwestern farms to Chicago, as well as to the West Coast and just other parts of the Midwest. And this market was subject to very stiff competition. Competitors the Rock Island faced were like the Chicago Northwestern Railway, the Chicago Burlington and Quincy, the Milwaukee Road. Chicago Burlington Quincy was also just the Burlington route, sometimes referred to as. It also faced the Union Pacific, whom they would also work with to carry trains, at least freight as far as Omaha, that would be going to California. They also worked with the Durango and Rio Grande Western, or the Rio Grande Western, to carry stuff from Denver to Omaha or Chicago. And then they also kind of competed with the Santa Fe, at least as far as New Mexico, where they linked up with the Southern Pacific. And to make a very long and complex story unnecessarily short, the Rock Island basically got smothered out of existence, much like the Milwaukee Road did. It basically spent a decade treading water trying to merge with the Union Pacific, and failed due to the protests of the Chicago Northwestern, the Milwaukee Roads, and basically every other railway that interchanged traffic at Omaha, because the Rock Island would, if they merged, would give the Union Pacific direct access to Chicago, which would basically doom the Chicago and Northwestern and the Milwaukee Roads freight business between California and the Midwest, which ironically, when the Western Pacific was absorbed into the Union Pacific, it actually did that to the Southern Pacific on the western side, which is one of the other things that kind of doomed the SP's existence in the 80s. One of the main differences between this and to some extent the Milwaukee Road, or at least a lot of it, largest difference between it and the Milwaukee Road, was that some of the lines were useful even if its branch lines didn't provide enough business to keep the business in business effectively. So if the merger with the Union Pacific would have gone through, the Rock Island's Choctaw route between Amarillo, Texas and Memphis, Tennessee would have been sold to the Santa Fe, and as far as I can tell, it's been abandoned after Oklahoma and Arkansas didn't form a company to buy and operate the line. And then the route from Colorado to Omaha would have been sold to the Rio Grande. And from what I can tell, the SP was going to try to buy the Golden State route from Tucumcari to Kansas City, which it ended up doing after the Rock Island formerly went bankrupt in 1980. And also through the St. Louis and Southwestern, or the Cotton Belt, had a connection to St. Louis. And then when the SP applied to take over the line in 1979, it had been trying to do so for about 15 years, which was basically from the time the UP and Rock Island officially started courting each other for a merger. And the Rock Island route from Kansas City to St. Paul was also bought by the Chicago Northwestern, and their line from Omaha to Chicago was bought by the Iowa Interstate Railway, which was created by the state of Iowa to maintain the line. And ironically now, since the major winners of the Rock Island collapsing was the Chicago Northwestern and the Southern Pacific, the Union Pacific basically owns almost as much as it would have of the Rock Island when it was trying to merge in the 1960s. So that's kind of just a little rundown of the history of the demise of the Rock Island. I may or may not do a video on this. It's so far in the future. It's not even on the drawing board, so I'm not sure if I ever will. The final place this railway goes, or not this railway, the final place this busted train of thought ends up going is what is Amtrak doing on the route these days? And the answer is, at least on the Golden State route, nothing. The main LA to Chicago route on the Amtrak is the Southwest Chief, and Amtrak's underwhelming 2035 plan doesn't show any service on the Golden State route either, so its future as a passenger link is non-existent. Other parts of the Rock Island are faring slightly better. The Illinois DOT has been wanting to run a corridor train between Chicago and Des Moines over the Iowa Interstate Railway, but as of writing, which is late October of 2020, there is no deal. Who knows if one will get agreed to at any point in the future. If so, good going. I may or may not do an update video, considering I make these like 6 to 9 weeks ahead of when they go live. Just gonna leave it there, and we are done with this one. This is also gonna be another fairly short one to kind of round out what will go with being a series of the transcontinental trains between Chicago and Los Angeles. Next one I think is gonna be another fairly short one about Union stations, and then after that I'm not really sure because I'm not entirely done writing it yet. Hopefully you stick around and you'll see that one when it comes out, or whatever I end up doing. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.